Are NFTs stupid? Or partially stupid? Or not stupid at all, in fact? I want to get to a point in this video where we understand what NFTs actually are. I want you to know what NFTs are technically speaking, without necessarily getting into every little technical detail. Because what I want to do is compare what NFTs actually are to what people say they are. Because it's my contention that, for the most part, those two things are very different. Like, if you read about NFTs in online articles from reputable newspapers, or listen to people that sell NFTs and what they say they are, that's very different to what they actually are. And if I can persuade you of that fact, does that make them pointless or stupid? Well, actually, I've changed my mind a number of times on that point. So let's see if we can figure it out. You'll notice that I've given this video chapters. That's because I need to go over some basic stuff first. For example, we really need to start by talking about cryptocurrency. And if you understand that, you can skip forward. If you want to take a deep dive into what cryptocurrency is and how it works, I highly recommend 3 Blue 1 Brown's video on the subject. The link is in the card and in the description. But the best simple analogy for the way a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin works goes like this. A cryptocurrency like Bitcoin is powered by a ledger that cannot be tampered with. In the case of Bitcoin, that ledger is called the Bitcoin blockchain. You may have heard the word blockchain before. Blockchain is just a tamper-proof list of transactions. I won't go into the details of how it's tamper-proof, but in basic terms, it's because anyone can have a copy of this ledger, and new entries can only be added to the ledger by cryptographic consensus. So you could look at this blockchain ledger and see that Alice sent 2 Bitcoin to Bob, Bob sent 1 Bitcoin to Charlie, Charlie sent half a Bitcoin to Alice. You can look at the history of all these transactions and see, oh, look, Alice has 3.5 Bitcoin. The only entries that you are allowed to add to the blockchain ledger are transactions that send Bitcoin from your stash to someone else's stash. Or to use the proper words, you can only send Bitcoin from your address to someone else's address. You can't take Bitcoin from someone else's address. You can't even refuse Bitcoin that is sent to you. So it's those two facts that make Bitcoin what it is: the fact that it's a tamper-proof ledger and the fact that you can only send cryptocurrency from yourself. Everything that's interesting and useful about Bitcoin flows from those two facts. I mean, plus the fact of how new Bitcoin comes into existence, but I'm not going to get into that. NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, are very similar to Bitcoin. They exist on a different ledger. So like Bitcoin exists on a ledger called the Bitcoin blockchain, whereas NFTs typically exist on the Ethereum blockchain. The Ethereum blockchain isn't just for NFTs. It can do all sorts of different things, including cryptocurrency. But NFTs on the Ethereum blockchain work in a very similar way to Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain. So you can look through the ledger and see, look, Alice sent this NFT to Bob, Bob sent this NFT to Charlie, and so on. The thing that makes non-fungible tokens different to Bitcoins is that they're non-fungible. What does non-fungible mean? Well, fungible just means interchangeable. Like, if you took $10 from me and gave me back a different $10, then nothing would have changed, or at least not in any way that I care about, because I've still got $10. Whereas if you took my wedding ring and gave me back your wedding ring, well, I would care about that, because this is my wedding ring, right? It was the one that my wife put on my finger when we said our vows. To me, even if your ring was of equal monetary value, it doesn't matter. My wedding ring is non-fungible. But actually, for the purposes of this video, there's a better analogy. Suppose I'm at the arcades and I'm playing some games, and occasionally I win, so I get these tokens. And I collect these tokens because I can exchange them for goods at the shop that's on site there. And I've collected 10 tokens already, so I'm off to the shop to get the oversized teddy bear, because that's how many tokens you need for the oversized teddy bear. And on the way, for some reason, you take 4 of my tokens. You grab them off me, and then you give me back 4 different tokens. From a tokens point of view, I don't really care. I've still got 10 tokens, and I can still get the oversized teddy bear. because these tokens are fungible, they're interchangeable. But now suppose as I'm going around the arcade and I'm winning games, the tokens are coming out, but there's something written on them. So for example, one has written on it, this token can be used to buy a chocolate bar. And another token says, this can be used to buy a flip-flop from the shop, and so on. So I'm on the way to the shop with my tokens and you snatch one off me that says chocolate bar on it. And you give me back another token that says celery stick. And suddenly I'm not so happy because now I can't buy a chocolate bar, but I can buy a celery stick. That's not what I want. I mean, I like celery, but... So these tokens that have something written on them, they're not interchangeable, they're non-fungible. They're non-fungible tokens. They're real-life NFTs. NFTs are made possible by the Ethereum blockchain because it works differently to the Bitcoin blockchain. The difference between the Bitcoin blockchain and the Ethereum blockchain is a bit like the difference between a calculator and a computer. With a calculator, you can calculate things. With a computer, you can program it to be a calculator and calculate things, or you can program it to be something else, a word processor, or you can play games on it. In a similar way, the Bitcoin blockchain is for cryptocurrency. The end. Whereas the Ethereum blockchain is programmable. You can write a program for the Ethereum blockchain that launches a cryptocurrency. Or you can write a program for the Ethereum blockchain that does something else. For example, you could write a program and publish it to the Ethereum blockchain that can be used to create NFTs. These programs that you publish to the Ethereum blockchain are called smart contracts. And once they're on the blockchain, they're there to stay. You can't delete them, you can't stop them from working because it's an indestructible ledger of everything that has happened. So once it's there for good, and anyone can interact with those contracts if they want to. So if you publish a contract to the blockchain and it conforms to certain standards, then by consensus, we call that an NFT contract. It's a contract that mints NFTs when it's interacted with in the right way. So what's the point of NFTs? Well, here's a real-world hypothetical use case. I'm hosting an event. It's a seated event. There's good seats at the front, crappy seats at the back, and they're all numbered. And you can buy a ticket for a seat at this event. But instead of selling paper tickets or traditional electronic ticket that I might email to you, instead, we're going to use NFTs. I publish an NFT minting smart contract for this event, and I use it to mint an NFT for each seat at the event. Why would that be better than a traditional ticketing system? Well, it's about authentication and reliability. Like, if you bought a paper ticket, you could lose it or someone could copy it. If it's an electronic ticket, maybe my database gets hacked or deleted or destroyed in some other way. But the Ethereum blockchain can't be accidentally deleted. And when you turn up at the event, you can prove that you were the person that bought that NFT ticket for that particular seat. How do you prove that you were the purchaser of that specific ticket? Well, for this, we need to get into cryptography a little bit. The important thing to know is that you have a secret string of digits. It's called your private key, and maybe you store it on your phone. And there's a corresponding public key that anyone can know. And actually that public key is your address on the Ethereum blockchain. Only someone who knows that private key can transfer the NFT to someone else. In that sense, it's the private key that confers ownership. You should never tell anyone your private key. But anyway, thanks to the way cryptography works, when you show up at my event, you can prove that you have the private key associated with the public key that is linked to the NFT ticket on the Ethereum blockchain without having to show anyone your private key. And that's how you prove you are the person who owns the ticket for that seat at my event. So, welcome to the event. That's one use case. An indestructible record of who owns what. Specifically, if it's a thing where you would want to redeem the value of it later, like attending an event. Just a quick note actually on how you buy NFTs. Well, actually, weirdly, you buy NFTs in the same way that you buy anything, potentially. Like, I could set up a PayPal account for my event, and if you want to buy an NFT ticket, then you have to transfer dollars or pounds to my PayPal account. And when I see that you've done that, I will then transfer the NFT to your public address that you've told me to transfer it to. And I'm sorry, but you have to trust me that I will do that. But surely the whole point of cryptocurrency is that it doesn't require trust in the transaction process. And actually, if you want to buy and sell NFTs without trust, well, you can do that. For example, you could write an escrow smart contract and publish it to the blockchain. And I, as the seller of the NFTs, can read the code of the smart contract and know how it will behave. So I can be confident of transferring the NFT to that contract and know that it won't get transferred anywhere else until the person who wrote that contract transfers Ether into that contract. And I know from the code of the smart contract that that Ether will be transferred directly to me. I mean, smart contracts are really cool. It's worth saying that NFTs actually aren't being used in this hypothetical way that I just described, or at least not to any significant scale. You might wonder why. Well, it's probably for the same reason that people aren't generally using Arch Linux. Like, it's good, but it's really confusing and difficult. So what are NFTs used for? Well, mostly they're used in conjunction with digital art. And this is where the problem starts. Like, you might be thinking, yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that NFTs are used to sell digital art. But that's the problem. Like, what does that mean? Are people really selling digital art with NFTs? Let's have a look at the second most expensive NFT ever sold. The New York Times reported that a JPEG created by a digital artist called Beeple was sold in an online auction for $69.3 million. And that is not true. The JPEG was not sold. That's how the New York Times presented it. What about The Verge? The Verge said that an NFT of Beeple's artwork was sold for $69 million. An NFT of, what does an NFT of mean? Does it mean that the artwork itself is put on the blockchain and can only be accessed by the buyer? Well, it's no on both counts, actually. It turns out that adding data to the blockchain is expensive. And, well, a JPEG is huge compared to just a short string of text, let's say. And even if the artwork was put on the blockchain, anyone would be able to see it. And that's the point of the blockchain. So it wouldn't be some exclusive way for only the buyer to be able to see the image by putting it on the blockchain. Putting it on the blockchain would make it publicly viewable. Perhaps the NFT confers copyright in the image somehow. Well, actually, Beeple himself talks about that in an interview with CNBC. He says, I think that people don't understand that when you buy, you have the token, the NFT. You can display the token and show that you own the token, but you don't own the copyright. And that's true. So perhaps it's more like buying a pop song. When you buy a pop song, really what you're buying is the right to listen to that pop song. So maybe when you buy an NFT, you're buying the right to look at or display that digital art. But again, that kind of right would require a traditional legal agreement outside of the blockchain. But perhaps the point of NFTs is to do away with the need for a traditional legal agreement. Perhaps control over who is able to view a digital artwork can be managed cryptographically instead. Well, let's actually track down Beeple's $69 million NFT on the blockchain and see if it works like that. So using the OpenSea website, I looked up the owner of the NFT. That's Metacoven. That's a thumbnail of the image. And if you go down here, look, this is the address of the smart contract. That's the smart contract that was added to the blockchain for the purposes of making NFTs. And this is the ID for the particular NFT that was made by this contract that represents Beeple's artwork. So let's have a look for that NFT on the Ethereum blockchain. Now, I could download the Ethereum blockchain in its entirety onto my computer and explore it that way. Or instead, I can use Etherscan, which is a website that does that for me. So look, this is the smart contract that mints the NFTs. And remember, a smart contract is a program. We can actually send commands to this program. So I can say, for example, tell me the token URI. Remember, that was the string of text that makes it non-fungible, along with the contract address and token ID. And the token ID is 40913 in this case, right? So if we put that in, it spits out this. This is the token URI. You'll notice it's IPFS instead of HTTPS at the front there. That's a complicated thing to get into, but the point is it's a location on the public internet. If you put this URI into a regular browser, it might not work. Some browsers have the IPFS protocol built in, so you could put this URI into the Brave browser, for example, and you're exploring the IPFS, which is the Interplanetary File System. And look, when you put in the URI from Beeple's NFT, you get a text file. It's a bit ugly, let's prettify that a little bit. And there we go, we can see this data. It's in JSON format, which is machine readable, but humans can read it too. So here we've got some information about the artwork. We've got the name of it, right? We've got the description of it. There's a little preview image available here, and the full JPEG file is here. Interestingly, instead of that being the IPFS address, they've put in this ipfsgateway.makersplace.com address. This is just a service that explores the IPFS and presents it to normie browsers, basically. So we can input that and it will begin to load the artwork. Look, it's very, very slow. Here it is, it's coming in now. And by the way, this is a super high res image. If I clicked on this to zoom in, I mean, I might be in breach of copyright to put it on a video, so we'll stay zoomed out. And once that's loaded, well, that's on my computer. Weirdly, there's nothing illegal about me downloading this image. It's available on the public internet. You could go to this URL and you could download this image. And that, generally speaking, is how NFTs work in relation to digital art. Before I asked, what does an NFT of mean? Because an NFT of is what people say a lot in articles. Well, an NFT of a digital artwork means that there exists a URI on the blockchain that is cryptographically assigned to a specific person or their public address, and that URI points either directly to the image file somewhere on the open internet, or it points to a text file on the open internet, and inside that text file, there is another URI that points to the artwork itself. So when you buy an NFT, a new line is added to the ledger that associates the NFT with you. So you're buying a line in a ledger. I mean, it's a pretty cool line in the ledger because it means that you are now the only person in the whole world that can write lines in the ledger about that NFT, which is to say, you're the only person that can transfer the NFT to someone else. You know, when you put it like that, it almost sounds like you don't own anything when you buy an NFT. But actually, I think we can stretch the definition of ownership to include NFTs. And I don't mean the artworks, I just mean the tokens themselves on the blockchain, not the things that they point to. Like, I feel like I own the money in my bank, but it's just ones and zeros in the bank's database. Like, I think it's reasonable to use the language of ownership when you're talking about these tokens that exist on the blockchain. Again, not the artwork that they point to, but the tokens themselves. In other words, when you buy an NFT, you own control over a string of digits on the blockchain. And when you put it like that, it sounds like owning an NFT that points to a JPEG on the open internet is a stupid idea. Like, anyone can download that image. So why would you want to own control over a string of text on a tamper-proof ledger that points to that image? In that sense, NFTs are stupid. But are they though? Like, if I found a picture of Patrick Stewart on the internet, there'd be nothing special about that. And if I printed out that picture of Patrick Stewart, there'd be nothing special about that either. I'm sure loads of people have printed out that picture of Patrick Stewart. I know I have loads of times. But if I took this picture of Patrick Stewart to Patrick Stewart and asked him to sign it, well, to me at least, that would be a very special picture of Patrick Stewart. Because in some sense, Patrick Stewart has endorsed this picture of Patrick Stewart. And things like that have value in our society. Like, you can argue that it doesn't have intrinsic value. You can't use it for shelter. You can't eat a signed picture of Patrick Stewart. But for whatever reason, when a celebrity signs their likeness, it has value. And in a similar way, if an artist says, I have put this URI on the internet that points to my artwork, and its location on a tamper-proof ledger is special, well, then that has value. In the same way that when an artist signs a print of their artwork, that has value. Like, I could mint an NFT now that points to Beeple's URI. Would it have the same value? Well, of course not, because I'm not the artist. In the same way that if I signed a picture of Patrick Stewart, it wouldn't be as valuable as if Patrick Stewart signed a picture of Patrick Stewart. I was actually planning to do that very thing, to mint an NFT that points to Beeple's artwork, because I wanted to see how people would respond to it. And it wouldn't be copyright infringement because you can't copyright a URI. And it would be clear in the metadata, in that intermediary file, that I wasn't claiming to be the artist. It would say, this is Beeple's artwork, it's not mine, it's just a URI. That's all it is. But then I'm not a lawyer, and I didn't want to take the risk without speaking to one. So I asked a lawyer friend of mine 2 questions. Would it be legal for me to create an NFT in this way? And even if it was legal, would someone with a lot of money be likely to try and sue me anyway? Here's Devin from LegalEagle.
Yeah, so the short answer is it's probably illegal in many different ways. The longer answer is it depends, but it's probably still illegal. The thing about copyright is that it's an open question as to whether NFTs infringe on a copyright. A copyright protects people from copying something, but it also protects people from creating what's called a derivative, something that is inspired by the original piece of art. So if you create an NFT, there's an argument that there's no copyright infringement going on because you're just pointing to some piece of art that exists on some other server, whether it's decentralized or not. But copyright is just the tip of the legal iceberg here. Copyright isn't the only intellectual property protection. For example, there's trademark. Let's say that you make an NFT related to someone's song. People have done this. So you're creating an NFT based on the name of the artist, the name of the song, and potentially the artwork associated with the album cover. You're making it seem like you have the approval of the band and that the band is the one that's creating this NFT. That's probably trademark infringement. Then there's all kinds of misappropriation of likeness claims, false advertising, and unfair business practices. So if you go out and you make an NFT related to someone else's work, I would not want to represent you. Or maybe I would want to represent you because then I'd be getting all kinds of fees for all the illegal stuff that you've just been doing. But Steve, you're right. There's a wide gulf between what people think NFTs are and what they actually are, especially when you're talking about the law. NFTs, as you point out, are really just a contract between two people, and what the NFT represents is based on the terms of that contract. Yes, you're buying a line in a ledger, but what that ledger allows you to do is just based in regular contract law. For example, you say an NFT represents a piece of art, or it's like a ticket, it allows you entry into some event, or it entitles you to some revenue based on something else. Well, that's all based in regular contract law. And what happens when you try and sell that to somebody else? What if those terms don't travel to the downstream buyer? This is a legal morass. And NFTs don't supplant copyright law. Sometimes they run straight into it and infringe on copyright law. NFTs aren't going to supplant the entire Copyright Act. That is basically set in stone unless Congress changes it. Believe me, there are a bunch of legal issues that no one seems to be talking about associated with NFTs. I cover all of that over on my channel, but the bottom line is, don't create an NFT like that.
I won't do that then. Thanks, Devin. By the way, his full video is excellent. I make a small appearance in it as well. The link is in the card and the description. It's also on the end screen, so check it out once you've finished this one. We haven't talked about NFTs as digital collectibles, which is how they started with CryptoPunks. So you've got this front-end website that uses the Ethereum blockchain as the back-end database, and you can go on, you can see, look, these are the CryptoPunks that I've got. These are the CryptoPunks that this person's got. Ooh, that's a rare one. Maybe I'll try and buy that one off them, and so on. And you could argue that that doesn't have value. But then you would also have to say that trading cards don't have value. But for whatever reason, trading cards do have value. And CryptoPunks do for the same reason, because they're the same thing. It's just a digital version of that. And in a similar way, NFTs of digital artworks have value, so long as they were created by the artist. So if there's a digital artist that you like and you want to support them, NFTs aren't a bad way to do that, because you get a digital collectible and they get beer money. To be clear, the person who spent $69 million on Beeple's NFT probably wasn't doing it because they wanted to support the artist. I mean, that might have been part of it, but most likely that price tag reflects the fact that they thought it would appreciate in value. The question of whether that will be the case or whether NFTs at the moment are a bubble is probably for a different video. I recommend a video called Line Goes Up by Folding Ideas, by the way. He also covers the fact that the NFT space is rife with scams at the moment. But anyway, if NFTs are a bubble, the question is what will be left when it collapses? You know, the .com bubble collapsed and we were left with something transformative. So who knows? Will there be a mature market for artists to sell NFTs to people who want to support them? Take this artist, for example. I actually know him and I really like his story. Every artwork that he produces is related to an aspect of his life or the journey that he's on. And I'm really interested in that journey. Last time we caught up, he showed me this piece and explained what it means. So this piece has value to me. So the fact that he's getting into NFTs is a good thing for me, I think, because I like collecting things. Specifically, I like collecting things that have meaning to me. You know, transactions on the Ethereum blockchain come with a significant carbon footprint. So until they transition to the less carbon intensive proof of stake system, I might hold off on actually buying that NFT for now. But if you asked me now, are NFTs stupid? I'd probably say they don't have to be. I guess my beef is just with the way people talk about them. Like when you buy an NFT, you're not buying the artwork. You're not buying an NFT of the artwork. You're buying an NFT that points to the location of the artwork on the open internet. And that's okay, so long as we're all honest about that. You know, over the years, I've worked out that the best way I learn is by building things and doing things. Like, for example, by building a smart contract that actually works on the blockchain. I feel like I really understand the Ethereum blockchain now because I had to solve all these puzzles and problems along the way. And honestly, I believe that's the best way for most people to learn STEM subjects, which is why I'm grateful to the sponsor of this video, Brilliant. Brilliant is a STEM learning platform that's incredibly interactive. Take a look at this logic puzzle from their logic course. All the courses on Brilliant are interactive in this way. And you can find courses on things like logic or geometry, but they also have courses on computer science, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and naturally they have a course on cryptocurrency. So you can learn all about that through Brilliant. Brilliant's available on desktop, of course, but it's also got an app, and that's the main way that I consume Brilliant, actually. As I'm lying in bed, I scroll through Brilliant instead of scrolling through whatever other thing. And so instead of passively consuming something, I'm actively learning something instead. To get started for free, go to my special URL, brilliant.org/Steve Mould. The first 200 people to use that URL will also get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. The link is also in the description, so check out Brilliant today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, don't forget to hit subscribe. And the algorithm thinks you'll enjoy this video next.